welcome back. Well, I know most of you waited for this workshop because publishing is one of the most essential thing of a life of a researcher. So, hope you are refreshed and ready for the session. Hold on tight because here we go. Please welcome the moderator for the most awaited workshop of the conference, the publication workshop by Professor Nias Asadullah. Professor Nias Asadullah from the Faculty of Economics and Administration, University Malaya, Malaysia. Today, he will be conducting this session on under the title of Social Sciences Research on Children Publishing in SSCI Journals. Professor Nias, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Christopher, and thanks to organizer for having me in this exciting conference. I'm very glad to be back. I have participated in several TIKM conference, and they were very worth the experience. So just to double confirm before I start my lecture, are you able to see my slides moving? Are the slides moving?
Yeah, we can see it.
They're moving, right?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So again, as Christopher said, the focus of this workshop is to give participants in this conference some tips on how to publish your research on children in SSCI journals. This may be new to some of the participants. SSCI journal, and so in due course I'll explain. But again, let me start by congratulating all of you for participating in this conference and having presented your work. And I did look at the conference program and I was pretty impressed. I was impressed by the range and depth of topics on children and youths. They range from children's welfare in armed conflict to programs devoted to developing youths, sometimes through curriculum development, sometimes co-curricular development. And also there are a lot of presentations on children's well-being during the pandemic, often with exclusive focus on girls. There has been also interesting papers on early childhood development, and again, a range of dimensions relating to well-being, loneliness, happiness, and homelessness, and so on. So this is, therefore for me, a very good mix of social science research on children and youth. So the challenge that you face after the conference is the big question that, well, where should you send your manuscript? And this is a challenge because when you look at the range of outlets out there, it is very wide. And that can be very confusing for you as well. And here is my selection of a couple of journals that publish extensively research on children and youth. And as you can see from the title, they are quite varied. Some are what we call field journal. They're dedicated to research on children. Some are quite broad in nature. For example, Child Indicator Research, Journal of Adolescent Health, Children and Youth Services Review, they're dedicated to youths and children. On the other hand, social indicator research, world development, social science research address again, policy issues relating to youth as well as adults. Now, then, but of course, in a developmental context, and again, they cover, disciplines broadly within social science, covering from sociology to psychology to anthropology and of course to education and economics. And then at the top right-hand corner, you see two journals, Compare, which comes out from UCL Institute of Education in England, and then International Journal of Educational Development. These two journals publish extensively on children and youth, but with an exclusive focus on educational development. And at the bottom right-hand corner, you see two journals, Quality and Quantity, and then Procedia. Now, these are kind of journals which welcome anything under the sun. meaning that they would publish manuscripts on social science as well as non-social science, physical, biological, engineering science. So this is where you are left to ponder that, well, how do you go about choosing your journal? How do you make sure that your research finds the right home? And again, why does it matter? Why does journal selection matter? It matters because, well, it influences readership. It can limit, wrong choice can limit the outreach and impact of your scholarship. So what I will do in this lecture is to cover on, so touch on some of these points. I've organized the lecture in 3 parts. First is why publish in SSCI, but I'll start with the broad question of why publish at all. And then I will move to the next point, which is why publish in accredited journal, and what are the different ranges of accreditation. And within that context, why does SSCI accreditation matter more? And again, there are hundreds of SSCI journals. Which one should you prioritize? How would you decide? And then the second part of the presentation, which is going to reconnect with the conference presentations, where we have seen a range of papers. Again, I'll sort of provide you a critical reminder of, what are the do's and don'ts, or what are the good practices when it comes to social science research on children, because it does have a bearing on what your final manuscript will look like, and that in turn will decide where you get to publish this. Okay, so I will share some general tips on therefore researching on children within social science, and then I will move to the last part, where I will share some personal reflecting on my own research on children and youth. What defines them, and then where did I publish them, and then I'll actually give you a walkthrough of one social science journal article on children, again reminding you of the research process. The emphasis I will make is that, well, publication is a long process. The input decides the output. Where within social science journals your paper will be published depends on how much effort you put in the first place to prepare the manuscript. So that is the broad structure of the presentation. Before I proceed, is there any question from anyone? So I will try to finish a bit early so that we have enough time for discussion. Okay, so before I proceed, let me clarify one thing that, well, I've been given a very limited time budget, so I'm not going to cover everything. What does it mean? I'm not going to sort of teach you how to prepare your manuscript, particularly the entire research process. I'll briefly comment on the research process, but I won't sort of spend a lot of time on conceptualization, and then framing and execution of the research in the context of your manuscript. And again, once you have done your research, once you have prepared your manuscript, there are a lot of extra work that has to go in. So I'm not sort of, again, going to go into the nitty-gritties of that. But of course, if there is sufficient interest, I'm sure we can organize a follow-up session at another occasion. Now, again, there is another aspect where I'm not going to go into, which is how to deal with reviewers and editors of a journal once you are invited to revise your manuscript. So how should you revise? How should you deal with referee criticism? How should you prepare your resubmission letter? All of those, again, have a bearing on the final outcome, which is acceptance of your paper in a journal. So again, so there are many steps. So far as the process of putting together paper and having it secured in a top social science research, what this presentation is going to do is to give you a broad outline of some of those steps, but not going so much in detail. But I will spend a lot of time on clarifying the nature of the SSCI journal, again, the range within social science, and how to go about choosing some of those journals for your research. Okay, so again, so far as the focus is concerned, I'm an economist specializing in education and international development. So therefore, there will be that bias in my selection of papers and the examples I present before you when I talk about research on children and youth. But having said that, I'm a heterodox economist. So what does it mean? I am involved in a number of journals as editor, as well as member of the editorial board. Now, they cover, again, journals in the field of international development, as well as comparative education, and of course, economics. At the same time, I'm involved with journals in the field of public policy. And last not least, I'm also one of the academic editors of PLOS ONE, which is quintessentially a multidisciplinary journal, meaning that they publish research from all fields within social science as well as pure science. So therefore, I will draw upon that experience, particularly during the Q&A session. Right, so first thing first, why publish? Before I talk about why publish in an SCCI journal, just to, again, this one, it's kind of a refresher. Well, we are, in an era where as academic, we have to stay relevant by publishing, else our employment is at stake. We will lose our social, relevance in an era of knowledge society. And therefore, we publish to, seek formal recognition as a scholar. We also publish to secure promotion, within our career. And of course, we publish to seek recognition from our peers, from our fellow academics. So you want to be known as an educationist. I want to be recognized as an economist. Someone else might be, keen to be recognized as a sociologist. So that recognition comes from our peers, and they give us recognition based on what we published, and most importantly, where we publish. So the question, where should we publish? Well, it does matter where you publish, because it's kind of a signal of the quality of your paper. There are a range of journals. Again, I'll clarify this in a minute. There are good journals, there are bad journals, and then there are journals that are scandalous. They are predatory in nature. The editors are waiting to pounce on your innocence and your unfamiliarity with bona fide journals and journals that are not good, and it can cost you your academic reputation. And again, why is it? Because again, there are a range of editors managing journals. They vary in quality. There are incompetent, irrelevant, and lazy editors. Those journals are badly managed. They publish work that are often stolen, badly plagiarized. Those journals have papers that are often retracted. You really don't want your work to be featured on those journals. Now, the risk of all of these is so much higher if the journal is non-accredited. What does it mean? It's not included in an well-recognized index. Now, again, I'll clarify what that index looks like. But again, what is the first price of publishing in a non-accredited journal? The first price is that your work will not enter the citation database. So what does it mean? End of your career, you wouldn't have an H index, you wouldn't have an impact factor. Right. So again, it's not enough to have a journal with papers given digital object identifier or DOI. The journal has to be included in one of those formal, widely used indices for you to have a formal H index. Now, so again, as I've said, that the risk of losing out or losing your, damaging your reputation is so much higher if you publish in an unindexed or non-accredited journal. And here is a case study. It's quite popular in many parts of the developing world, Middle East Journal of Scientific Research. Now, it looks pretty scientific from the cover page, but as you can sense, it doesn't really define science. And if I take you to the journal webpage, this is what you will find: aims and scope. They publish pretty much anything under the sun. So it has no well-defined scope. Now, that is not the only issue. What it is that they offer publication within a short period of acceptance. And they say that their papers are indexed by all major scientific indexing services, which is, utterly false. So what the journal doesn't tell you is who is the editor. What the journal doesn't tell you is, what is, its impact factor. Now, so all those things should raise the alarm bell. Now, so therefore, if you publish in non-accredited journal, they are managed by illegitimate publishing entities, which are, waiting out there to exploit your innocence. And in the long term, it can lead to loss of your international recognition, and in an extreme form can cost you your employability. Now, unfortunately, local journals often belong to this category. Journals that are managed by, universities with the intention of giving their own staff members an outlet for publication. They don't have international ambition, but they also open up to international submission. But publishing in these journals can be high risk. Now, having said that, there are some journals, in developing world that are highly respected, even in India and in Pakistan, and of course in Malaysia. But you have to pay attention to the matrix of those journals. You have to check whether the journals are listed in the major relevant citation indices, which I'll comment on shortly. So now again, if you publish in non-index journals, it is not just bad news for you. Your employers also suffer because it brings down the university's overall ranking in international assessment of university qualities, rankings such as Times of Higher Education ranking and QS ranking and so on. Now, again, therefore, the question is if you should avoid unindexed journal, which accredited journal you should look for. A general rule of thumb is you should look for Scopus and Web of Science in this index journal. Now, Web of Science, it has another name, Social Science Citation Index for social science. So that is what you should look for. Why? Because it gives you high visibility among your peers. These journals typically have a clear subject matter focus as well as disciplinary focus. If they are multidisciplinary, they will tell you straight away. But most importantly, they are managed by very senior scholars in the field who are guided by our team of, again, well-reputed scholars that you would be reading about in your literature reviews, scholars whose work you will be citing in your own paper. Whereas unindexed journals will be typically managed by scholars who you will not have known before, reading that journal, right? So the fact that accredited journals are well managed by senior scholars means that the review process will be competent and then the reviewers will be professional. So you'll get good feedback, your manuscript will grow in the process of, being published. And also, accredited journals, SSCI journals, offer a transparent editorial review policy. They are part of the Committee on Publication Ethics. What does it mean? Well, in many cases, they actually publish the referee report alongside the manuscript so that readers get to know how much effort the authors had to put to improve the manuscript before it was finally accepted for publication. And that is not all. Accredited journals are also managed by well-reputed publishers. So all of those things combined ensures enough check and balance and quality control. So again, the question, which accredited journal? Now, it is a relevant question because there are thousands of titles. Even if I'm talking about SSCI journal, which has an impact factor, here is a graph reminding you that overall there are 12,000 titles. Now, again, within SSCI, there are high quality journals and not so high quality journals. We typically identify them as Q1 and Q2 and Q3 and Q4 journals. Q1 journal are in the top, quartile. But within Q1, there is this top 10% where you really want to have one publication once in your lifetime, right? And even when you look at top 10%, we are still talking about over 500 titles. Now, the good news is that, well, this covers science and non-science. So when you go into social science, you have a slightly, smaller set to choose from. Nonetheless, it is still a long list. For me, within economics, there are as many as 400 titles to choose from, even if I'm talking about SSCI. So therefore, this is something that merits a bit more discussion. So again, why, so again, which journals within social science, many young scholars often confuse, index with repository. So for example, they say, oh, this journal is in JSTOR, or this journal is with Elsevier, or this journal is with Google Scholar, it must be a good journal. Again, these are all different ways to sort of assess a journal, but what you should be really looking for is whether the journal is in Scopus, citation database, or is it in SSCI. Now, I am going to focus on SSCI. In my own research, I prioritize SSCI over Scopus. Again, I'll clarify that in a minute. But again, within this, there are variation. Some SSCI journals are open access, some involve payment of fees, others don't, some are disciplinary, some are multidisciplinary. Nonetheless, there is this big range of SSCI journal within which you should be able to choose one for your research on children and youth. Now, the reason why I prefer SSCI, and I have chosen to talk about this in this presentation, is that throughout Southeast Asia now, universities are moving away from Scopus. As a matter of fact, the University of Malaya, where I'm employed, from this year has introduced cash incentive for academics if they publish in SSCI journal. For every SSCI Q1 journal publication, we are given $1,000 US. If you publish in Scopus journal, you are given $100 US. So 1/10. And the reason is because the university's ranking is influenced by the number of publication in SSCI journals, not the number of publication in Scopus journal, which is why universities within the region even forces academics to publish their publication list on the web, clearly stating whether the article that they published is in a Scopus journal or is it in an SSCI journal. And so they use a short form of SSCI, which is ISI. Okay, so this therefore is a reflection of where within Asia good universities are heading towards. Good universities are heading towards SSCI journal. The equivalent of that in science is called SCI. Okay, Science Citation Index. SSCI is Social Science Citation Index, and this is part of Web of Science database. So again, therefore, if you want to be part of this global trend, if you want to thrive as a researcher, you should be prioritizing publication in SSCI journal over non-index journal and Scopus journal. Now, again, so therefore, how should you go about? Well, you can go to the Web of Science database, and you can, sort of then put in the keyword for your topic, and it will give you, a range of journal titles. Now, again, here I have, I've shown you here the link for Scopus. So Scopus is a link. So if you go there, it will then produce a list of journals in Scopus database. You can put the keyword to kind of get a sense of what the relevant journals are. You can do the same with SSCI, right? And again, I would suggest a staggered approach depending on if you're an early career researcher, you might want to start with Q4. If you're an advanced career researcher, then you should target Q1 journals. Because the review process is going to be much more intense if you're in Q1 journal, but of course the reward is going to be much higher as well. But if you want to sort of start small, I would say start with Q4 and then gradually aim higher. Now, again, so the question, why does it matter? Isn't it sufficient to choose an accredited journal? Why does it matter to differentiate between SSCI and Scopus, indexation? Again, as I've said that, well, increasingly top disciplinary journals are found to be associated with SSCI database over Scopus database. But, there is another big reason why, SSCI has, received greater attention over Scopus. I'll clarify that in a minute. But before I do that, let me clarify exactly what are some of the metrics you should look for when you try to sort of assess an SSCI journal. Now, on the website of an SSCI journal, you will find number of indicators that are being displayed, such as impact factor of the journal, impact factor best quartile, 5-year impact factor, site factor, SJR rank. But the good ones will also provide more information, such as speed of acceptance. From submission to first decision, how many days does it take? From submission to first post review decision, how many days does it take? What is the acceptance rate? And then how many days does it take from acceptance to online publication? So almost all SSCI journals will provide you this kind of information, and it reflects two things. One is the academic standing of the journal, which is captured by impact factor, or with 1-year impact factor, 5-year impact factor. That is a function of how many times an average paper is being cited by others, right? And then the second set of indicators reflect how well managed the journal is, that you will be assured of professional service during the editorial process, and you will not be left to speculate. Once your manuscript is accepted for publication, it wouldn't take forever for it to be in print. So all of those information are made available to you upfront. And that, again, what gives these journals credibility. Now, so the point is, as I've said, that, well, many of you might be tempted that, well, SSCI is hard, why not I just go for Scopus? Now, many emerging, country academics, therefore have prioritized Scopus. This was also true for University of Malaya, which is why the management recently changed the policy, because it turned out that for the last 5 years, most of our colleagues were targeting Scopus journal instead of SSCI journal. And the map here shows the global distribution. And as you can see, that the darker part reflects the proportion of publication in Scopus journal. And as you can see that the darker part covers South Asia and a lot of Southeast Asia. Now, what has happened? What has happened is that, well, earlier this year, Scopus database was accused of providing home to many predatory journals, meaning that these are journals in the Scopus database. They do have impact factor, but nonetheless, they were out there with a mission to cheat and manipulate authors. And there is this article that kind of provides a very detailed. And what we have here on the graph, on the table, is the list of top 10 countries in terms of highest number of publication in Scopus journal. And as you can see, this includes Malaysia as well as India, as well as countries from Africa and many parts of emerging Asia. But collectively, they are dominated by emerging economy academics. And this is the list of predatory journals that are included in Scopus database. So after this development, universities within Southeast Asia are now very strict, and they are prioritizing SSCI journal, and which is why I have dedicated this session to publishing in SSCI journal. Now, let me now move on to the second part of the presentation. I've now given you an introduction to what is SSCI journal, why you care about SSCI journal, and how does it matter for your own research. Now, before I share more information, particularly based on my own experience of publishing in SSCI journal, let me sort of touch base on some of the fundamentals, because ultimately, whether you can publish in a Q1 SSCI journal depends on the quality of your manuscript. But that is not all. Sometimes it is also about getting the scope of the journal correct, read. Meaning that, well, different journals have different focus. So before you select a journal, you really have to be very clear about the orientation of your manuscript and its focus. If you get the scope wrong, then the journal might just desk reject you, saying that, well, there's a mismatch between what your paper is about and what the journal looks for. So therefore, the first thing you have to do is, before you actually think of writing, publishing in a journal, you have to be very clear in your head about the orientation of your manuscript. You have to be clear about the disciplinary orientation of your manuscript, whether it's a monodisciplinary approach that you followed in preparing the manuscript, or whether it is a multidisciplinary approach, because that has a bearing on the journal you will choose within social science. Within social science, you have got range of journals that are dedicated to disciplinary tradition, and then there are journals that are multidisciplinary. So therefore, to avoid mismatch in scope, you have to be clear in your head that what is the general approach to your in your research on children and youth. Again, when within social science, there are the disciplinary approaches include economics, education, psychology, anthropology, sociology, and then there is, of course, development studies. So you have to be very clear which is your dominant disciplinary orientation, because all these disciplines have dedicated journals catering to them. So within economics, there are journals that publish a lot on children. Economics of Education Review is one. There is another journal called Education Economics, which is dedicated to children's educational challenges. It is about schools and universities and so on, right? So therefore, you should be clear in your head that, well, what is your dominant disciplinary approach? Uh, and again, it is important because top SSCI journals don't want to compromise on their scope. They build a reputation by promoting certain disciplinary traditions, so they look for contribution along those lines. But beyond that, beyond sort of figuring out the disciplinary orientation of your manuscript, you also want to know your manuscript better. Having finished it, you want to ask yourself the following question: what is really original about your work? In what aspect is it new? Is it, do you consider your work at the frontier of research? Does it build on existing work? And in particular, does it build on recent work? So I sometimes get manuscript and I can tell within a couple of seconds that this is a manuscript that was written 5-6 years ago, and then the author didn't do anything. The easiest thing to do is to look at the age of your reference section. It's very obvious. So therefore, so what, top SSCI journals want is for scholars to contribute a manuscript that is engaged with an ongoing debate, and it is taking the debate forward. So a manuscript should be looked at as a conversation. So if you're not engaging with what other scholars are doing, if you're not building on it, you're not at the frontier of research. And again, this is something that greatly disadvantages your work and often is the reason for desk rejection. And the next thing that you have to ask yourself is that, well, in what aspect do you consider your manuscript to be new? Is it the choice of topic that you picked an issue that has been under research, or is it the way you conducted the research, that you provided a new methodological twist, or is it that you provided new measurements and data? Right. So again, that's something you want to highlight up front, and then you can also use that to decide which SSCI journal to pick. You might recall the journal cover page I showed you: child research indicator versus social indicator research. These are two journals that are dedicated to manuscripts that have their strength in new data and new measurement and new indicators, not in theory. So they publish a lot of papers on children and youth where the focus is on measurement and methods. So again, if you know your manuscript well, and if you know its strength, that can actually help you choose the journal. Now, beyond your originality of research, what top SSCI journal look for is the robustness of your result. That what they certainly avoid is what we call one table syndrome. What is one table syndrome? That, well, you have a lengthy manuscript, but you only have one results table. So what does it mean? Well, you did not revisit that table in 10 other ways. You did not show whether the main results you presented in the table would remain stable if you change the method of estimation, if you change the measurement of the key variables, or if you redefine your sample. So again, showing that your results are robust is, it goes a long way in getting into top SSCI journal. So and in the same spirit, you want to show that, by presenting evidence on robustness, you want to show that you have been critical enough in your research approach, that you have not taken the first set of estimates at face value, but rather you have been raising doubts and you've been questioning and challenging estimates, and you are still getting the same conclusion. And the third aspect that top SCI journal look for in social science, manuscript on children and youth would be that, well, is it relevant, or is it something very abstract? That are you writing on something that people around the world are debating? So in times of COVID, for example, everyone is talking about learning poverty, that school closures are pushing children at home and disrupting their learning experience. And therefore, many will not return to education. Some will, but they would have lost literacy and numeracy skills. And in the long term, this will lead to poverty when they grow up as adults, because they will be short of critical human capital needed to perform in the labor market. So if you are writing on this topic, top SCI journal will be certainly interested in your research on children and youth. So therefore, again, the three features that top SCI journals look for in a social science manuscript on children and youth is A, your research being original, new in terms of either choice of topic, methodology, or data. B, it being robust and your methodology being critical enough. And C, that it being topical, that the issue that you're addressing is trending in the policy cycle. So, therefore, again, when I was looking at the range of papers being published in this conference, I was thinking what else I could add to what you have already done. So you have seen many speakers, present on different topics in different ways. But again, social science is pretty broad, and we have a strong tradition of multidisciplinarity. So therefore, I thought I would give you some tips, because these are things that we look for as editor or as reviewer in a high quality social science research paper on children and youth. So I want to remind you of three things that we care in a good quality social science manuscript. So that so when you have finished a research paper, when we read the paper, we ask ourselves following question, that in what way the paper has been creative. So is the paper about cause of children's ill-being or poverty, or is it about the effect of children's poverty on their educational performance, or is it about the consequence of some parental action on children's well-being? So what we are trying to say here is that, well, when we get a manuscript, we want to have a very clear sense of the orientation of the paper. Okay, so therefore, regardless of what topic you have written on, so relating to children, you want to be sure, and you want to say that firmly in your abstract, whether the paper is about the cause of something on children, or whether it is about the consequence of something. Okay, so whether it's whether it's a paper about determinants of X, or whether it is about an impact of X on Y. And the next thing is, on which aspect of children are you researching on? Is it education? Is it health? Is it employment? Or is it a combination of all those? And again, so this has a bearing on the selection of your journal, because as I've said, research, social science and research on children, we have dedicated journals focusing on children's education. We have dedicated journals focusing on adolescent health. We have dedicated journals focusing on child labor. So therefore, knowing your manuscript and knowing your focus really helps. And if you communicate this with clarity to the reviewer and the editor, they can also assess the scope and the match of your interest and the interest of the journal. So therefore, A, it is about you being creative and clear about the focus, and B, communicating this with clarity to the reader. And again, so when I say creative, again, when you are writing on, education, so you can talk about children's education performance. Again, you can approach this in many ways. For example, you can, look at the impact of poverty on children's educational performance. At the same time, you can look at the impact of children's mental health on their education performance. Are happy children performing best in school, or are children who suffer greatly in income poverty underperforming in school? So this is, so you have to sort of think a bit out of the box and choose a question that has been under research for your given the topic, to show some, to sort of signal some creativity in your manuscript. And in the current context, there are many ways you can be creative. So linking all of these with the pandemic, but at the same time writing your manuscript in a way so that it stands out as different compared to existing research on children's well-being and natural disaster, and so that's very important. And again, in the same spirit, so you can be creative about research on children's education, health, employment, by connecting this to climate change. That's an area where not much high quality research exists. So therefore, again, the point is that whether you want to work on children's education, health, and employment, you can be creative by thinking about a factor in the context of cause or consequences. By thinking of the relationship in the context of natural disaster or climate change, all of those cross linkages can give your paper a creative outlook. So the second domain in which you can be creative is in terms of choice of methods and methodology. So again, this can relate to measurement of the main concept in your research. For example, if your research is about child poverty, then the innovation in methodology can go into the way you measure and conceptualize poverty, whether it is a unidimensional measure or it is multidimensional measure. Poverty is one, right? And again, so coming back again to methodology, there are many ways you can conduct research on poverty, well-being, happiness, education. So you can go qualitative, you can go quantitative, you can adopt mixed method. So again, there are many recent advances within quantitative. You can use cross-sectional approach, longitudinal, you can use individual data, aggregate data, country level data. Many are now also borrowing from psychology. Many social scientists are using experimental methods on children. So you can combine all of these. You can combine quantitative experiments with qualitative approach. Within qualitative, you have got text content analysis, you've got in-depth interviews, FGDs, you can have even longitudinal FGDs. But again, it is up to you to sort of say it upfront in your manuscript, in what aspect you are being creative. And you have to nurture creativity to make sure that your paper will excite an editor from a top SSCI journal. Okay, so, and again, the last point where you can be creative is sort of saying it very clearly, exactly where your contribution is. Is it in terms of the choice of question, the research question that you choose? Maybe, you rephrase the existing research question on your topic to focus on something that has been neglected in the literature? Or is it the way you conceptualized the main variable? Or is it the way you measured it? Or is it, linked to your method? So therefore, every manuscript should have a paragraph clearly stating your exact contribution, what is novel about it, and how it is different from others in the literature. So now, again, I have seen a range of presentation in this conference, but I also want to sort of, connect back to the point I mentioned earlier, that when you research on children, your selection of journals, even within the SSCI database, is very broad. So what I've done here is to present before you a range of papers published, all related to child poverty. But what you can see from this slide is that they are in different journals. You have research on child poverty in the Journal of Children and Youth Services Review. It's a top journal focused on children and youth exclusively. And then you have another paper on the same topic using data from Ghana, but it is in another specialized journal, Child Indicator Research. And then you have paper on the same topic in the journal that I edit, plus one. And again, you have a similar paper in the journal World Development, which is, which has an impact factor of 5, and it is ranked number 5 in the field of development studies. And again, I have included an example of a paper which is not about child poverty, but a very specific aspect of it. It is about learning poverty among children. And this time it is in International Journal of Educational Development, where I also serve as an associate editor. So what you can see here is that, well, there are manuscripts on children on a very particular aspect, which is poverty, but they're appearing in range of social science journals. So the big question is that, well, how is it decided that which paper is accepted in which journal? Well, it is partly decided by the criteria I have shared with you, i.e., how was the research question conceived, to what extent it is original, is it critical, where does the originality lies, in what way it is being creative, and so on. So which is why, therefore, 5 people writing a paper on child poverty gets to publish in 5 very different social science journals. But that is not all. Sometimes the publication is also decided by our perception of the relevant journal. There may be a very high quality journal article, but the author was not familiar with the relevant journal. For example, if you're writing on children and youth, you would obviously be biased towards the journal Children and Youth Services Review or Child Indicated Research. But you may not know that, well, your manuscript is of sufficiently high quality to actually interest a much general interest journal such as World Development. Okay, so therefore, it is down to reading widely, but at the same time, you can start with SSCI database, browse it, read the literature in journals from the database that publishes paper on children. And as you read the literature, you check the profile of editors to develop some sense of, in what way the articles published in the top Q1 SSCI journal on children differ in terms of content, in terms of appearance, in terms of the way they're being structured, they're being written. So the more you read, carefully, the better will be your understanding of what are the X factors that, take those papers in top journals. So here, World Development is a Q1 SSCI journal, plus one is a Q2. Children and Youth Research, Services Review and Child Indicated Research is Q2 or Q3. Okay, so and International Journal of Educational Development is a Q3 journal. So again, what you see here is kind of a range of titles, but again, they are kind of flat titles. So what does flat title mean? So look at the first title, a multidimensional child poverty index in China. So what it is doing essentially is focusing on measurement. So from the title, it's very clear that this paper is entirely about measurement. The second paper, multidimensional child poverty, is again about measuring the extent of child poverty. The third paper is interesting. It is about association between child poverty and governance. So it is a paper about determinants of child poverty at an aggregate level. The fourth paper is more interesting. The more gender equity, the less child poverty. So what it is doing is that it is looking at 49 countries using microdata to test empirically whether countries with greater gender equity experience less poverty among children. So this, in my opinion, is therefore a paper that has engaged with child poverty in a very critical way, linking it with something that others in the literature have overlooked, and doing so using a very rich set of data set, and which is why it's in a Q1 journal. But this is therefore an example of how you can think creatively for a given topic. The last paper goes beyond child poverty instead of focusing on learning poverty. But this is not all. There are so many other ways you can be very creative in your thinking about children. And here I have listed a range of examples from the social science literature. Okay, so the first one is children and life satisfaction. What is interesting here is that it is talking about children and adults' life satisfaction. So therefore, although the paper is about children, it is about implication of children for adults' well-being. So in that sense, it is creative. The second paper is about, children's maltreatment during school closure at home. So we have heard about domestic violence going up during the pandemic. What this paper does is to focus on children instead of adults, instead of women, when commenting on domestic violence. So that in that sense, it is being creative. The third paper is again an example of very creative social science research. It talks about the fact that in India, where Muslims in general are disadvantaged, in one aspect, there is paradoxically a Muslim advantage. Although Muslims are poorer economically, they are educationally deprived, it turns out that Muslim children at birth die less compared to children from Hindu households who are economically superior. So this is an example of being very, very creative about children's well-being. And doing so in a context that gives you a lot of social science perspective, that you are talking about the chance to be alive at birth. But what this paper then does is to look at a range of social science processes that decides who survives at birth and who dies. So this therefore is an example of, again, being very creative and pursuing research on children by really tackling the social determinants of life. The fourth paper is again, one of my highlights. What it does is that it looks at children's academic performance in school by going all the way back to whether their mothers were fasting when the child was in utero. So what it therefore does is that it correlates your current performance in school to the biological condition in which you were in before you were born. So this therefore provides very long-term determinant or genetic determinant of children's human capital development, but with reference to cultural practices, which is fasting within the Muslim tradition. So again, so I can give you a couple of examples. So at the bottom you can see that there are papers written on children linking their educational performance to their zodiac sign. So again, the reason why I have chosen this selection is to remind you that when you conduct research on children as a social scientist, top social science journal, top SCCI journal are expecting that you would draw upon the rich tradition within social science to conduct your research. Meaning that if you're an economist, you should not be just thinking in terms of carrot and stick or price and income. You should be also paying attention to culture, religion, and again, you should be paying attention to biology. So you therefore, increase your chance of publishing in top SCCI journal when you not only apply sophisticated empirical methods, but you show creativity in the way you conceptualize your research question, in the way you reposition an existing debate, in the way you contribute something new to a literature on which already much is available. So again, in order for you to think creatively and therefore position your findings creatively, you need to read widely. So what I've done here is to sort of present before you, a range of articles, again, that offers you a good summary of the literature. These are called survey articles in social science. So I have here presented you with examples from economics. So the one at the very bottom is the kind of example I have in mind. The title of the survey article is called Childhood Circumstances and Adult Outcomes. So what this article has done is to review social science literature on performance of adults, linking their performance today to the social circumstances they face as children. So if you read these review articles, they will give you very quick exposure to the state of the art social science on child research, and if you build on that science, it not only improves the quality of your manuscript, it makes your manuscript more relevant to top SSCI social science journal. Okay, so again, the second paper from the bottom provides an extensive review of research on children that combines two traditions within social science. One is psychology, another is economics. So again, if you build on this tradition, your chance of publishing in top SSCI journal goes up significantly. So the last point I want to comment on, so I've commented on thinking creatively, I've commented on reading widely. Now I want to comment briefly on writing with clarity. Okay, so because one thing that leads to desk rejection by good SSCI social science journal is the very appearance of your manuscript. That sometimes we do a lot of time, we spend a lot of time looking at the data, testing the hypothesis, but we forget to spend time on preparing the manuscript, giving it an academic outlook. Okay, so what does it mean? So some very basic points that when you write the manuscript, do not write as a journalist, write as an academic. So what does it mean? Use academic language, be precise, explain your ideas with clarity, and do that upfront. And when you are, reporting the results of research, use the scientific language. And here I've, even when it comes to English, it has to be the academic English. There is a distinction between journalistic English and academic English. And, here I've, given you a couple of examples that there are certain words that we expect to dominate in an academic manuscript. So I've left those examples here. And again, so when we see that, well, these terms are missing, that kind of tells us that, well, the author isn't very familiar with the academic tradition, and that makes us skeptical about the merit of the work. But that is not all. There are other aspects, to writing with clarity. The next one is construction of your sentence, strengthen sentence structure. As academics, we don't like wordy sentence, right? So we prefer that you break down your thoughts into short sentences, and then you have you have a manuscript comprising paragraphs where every paragraph deals with one thought, and then there is clear transition to the other, so that overall there is clear flow. Okay, and interlinkages that together your manuscript is well aligned, that when I'm going from your introduction section all the way to conclusion, there is consistency and coherence. Now that takes me to the third aspect, which is the title of your paper. So the title creates a first impression. So you want to have an attractive title that has a hook, but at the same time it is summative. It kind of in a nutshell tells me what the paper is about. And right below the title you have an abstract, and again, abstract often is the deciding factor, particularly in journals that are very busy. If your abstract misrepresents your manuscript, editor does not have the time to go and figure out whether the paper actually offers much more than what is in the abstract. So if you fail to summarize your work, that is your failure and you pay the price. So therefore, it is not just enough to write a good paper. It is also very important to have a very effectively written, balanced abstract. What do I mean by balanced abstract? An abstract that will tell me the why, what, and how of research. Why? What is the question? Why did you choose the question? How did you approach it and answer it? What are the methods and what are the findings? So all those ingredients have to be in a 100-word abstract. Some journals allow 100 words, some allow 200 words. You have to master that art. Okay, so very quickly, 5 rules, therefore, of desk rejection by SSCI. Well, sloppy copy. If your manuscript is sloppy, there is an error in your title, or poor punctuation in the abstract, it raises the alarm bell. We feel as editor that, well, you are not responsible enough. You have not taken good care of when writing the manuscript. So it might be that when you are doing the actual research, you are also not being careful enough. So we cannot really trust you. So don't, so therefore avoid being sloppy, and avoid obvious mistakes, particularly typos in your title and abstract. The second one is that, ambiguity, that it was very hard to figure out what is the main message. So don't make this mistake, particularly in abstract, say it very forcefully and clearly, what is the main punchline. The third, reason for desk rejection is major inconsistency or inaccuracy. Inaccuracy meaning that the results table says that, the relationship between X and Y is negative and insignificant. In your abstract, it says positive and significant. Once we see that, we don't give you the chance to come back to us. So that is a very common reason for desk rejection, when we find major inconsistencies between your claim and your results. The fourth one is unsuitability. This is unfortunate often, because there is a mismatch of scope. The journal is, interested in, say, poverty, but your paper is about, say, education with no reference to poverty. So, that would be then, a case of being outside the scope of the journal. Sometimes the unsuitability is also related to the format, that the journal invites manuscripts up to 8,000 words. You submitted a manuscript with 20,000 words. Right, and then lastly, it is about unclear impact or novelty, that, well, yes, the paper does have an academic outlook, that yes, it is written with clarity, that yes, there is no inconsistency, but it's a very boring paper, that it is unlikely to excite readers. So again, this is not an issue with, Q4 journal, but with Q1 journal, they are very choosy, and they tend to, sort of deprioritize journals that are not very impactful, meaning that these are papers that are replication type, they have been done to death. There are many other papers on the same topic for other countries. There isn't sufficient novelty. So those papers are also, desk rejected by top SSCI journal. So let me now move on to the last part of my presentation, but can I check with the organizer how many minutes I have?
I think we can take several minutes, Professor Nias.
Okay, thank you. So I'll finish in about 5 to 10 minutes. Okay.
Yep, sure.
Right. Okay. So let me now come to the last part of my presentation. So now I will reconnect with some of the points I've said, but by reflecting on my own experience with SSCI journal. So here I have, put together a selection of my own research on children. And again, as you can see, they are in a range of journals. From Economics of Education Review to World Development, Journal of Population Economics, Oxford Development Studies, Journal of Policy Modeling. So again, although, I have this focus on children, but, it's, with regards to different aspects of children's lives. So some of my research focuses on children's school performance, focusing on the question of why in developing countries, children go to school, but they learn very little in school. And is the problem with teachers, or is the problem with, parents, or is it about resources, or is it about the psychological deficit of it? So again, beyond that, I'm also interested in understanding the social attitude among youths and children. And again, so the third paper here is one in that category, where I combine, development in experimental psychology with, social science, economics research, to ask a question that hasn't been looked into the literature, which is that, well, when we measure attitude, which I have seen in this conference, some presenters have done, when we research on social attitude among children and adolescents, we typically give survey questionnaires, and we go by their stated response. What the paper does is to challenge all the existing survey-based approach to measuring social attitude among adolescents and children. So the paper does so by developing a new experimental tool to capture the extent of bias, social science surveys have when capturing, youth and children's attitude towards socially sensitive issues using direct question. So this paper, therefore, is an example of being creative in our research on children and youth with a focus exclusively on measurement issues. Measurement being that, well, many of you might be using Likert scale, which is ranging from 1 to 5 or 1 to 4, asking the respondent to indicate the extent of their support towards a phenomena. And what this paper does is to actually show that in what way it can be biased and then to quantify that bias. So again, so that is one reason why this manuscript on youth is in an economics journal. And again, the next manuscript is also on, attitude among youth, but this one is not about, measuring attitude. It is about studying the determinant of attitude among school children. And for that reason, it is in a multidisciplinary journal, because in this paper, I draw on the sociology literature as well as education literature and economics literature, combining literature from 3 fields within social science. The paper has an interdisciplinary outlook, which is why it is in an interdisciplinary journal. So therefore, this is something for you to keep in mind, that when you prepare your manuscript, you want to be very clear that in what sense it represents social science literature, and then that can help you decide where your work will be published. And at the end, you see example of papers. So the one at the very end. So this paper has a different orientation, where we look at children's performance as an indication of the quality of overall education system at the country level. So we use data on children to measure the quality of education system across country level. So that again is another way you can be creative when you talk about children, that you can use children's performance to comment on performance of institutions, if you like. Now, and again, when it comes to my own research on publication, again, within social science, here are the, selection of journal where I have published. And again, as you can see that, well, they are very varied. And the reason why they are varied is because my manuscripts vary in terms of quality, in terms of depth, in terms of question, in terms of approach, and which is why they are published in different journals, because within social science, different journals have different orientation, different preference, different editorial preference. So therefore, when I choose a paper, I speak to my colleagues, I speak, consult my peers, and of course, I read what is published in that journal. And based on that, I decide which SSCI journal is appropriate for me. And the same rule should follow. In your own case, you should engage extensively with your peer community. You should read widely to develop your own sense of the relevant journal instead of blindly following the SSCI ranking list. So here are a bunch of database that you can look at. These are disciplinary. So ABDC is one that is followed in Australia and also in Southeast Asia. If you go to ABDC journal, ranking list, this is prepared by academics, where for different disciplines within social science, they will present you with a selection of journals. So personally, I follow the ABDC list and ABS, which is followed in Europe. Both cover SSCI journals, but here academics help you identify good journals for your subdiscipline and topic within social science discipline. So I would strongly advise that you consult this too. So here is, so I'll skip this in the interest of time. You can go and check yourself. So this is the last slide. I will stop here. So, at the beginning of my presentation, I told you that I'll end the session by walking you through the life cycle of an SSCI journal article. And here is one. This paper is being written by a Pakistani student who did his PhD in the US. But what I have done here is, instead of giving you the abstract of the paper, I have presented here the list of acknowledgement from the paper. This list kind of sums up how much effort goes into a high quality social science paper on children. The title of the paper is as follows: The Persistent Effects of In Utero Nutrition Shocks Over the Life Cycle, Evidence from Ramadan Fasting. So what this paper does is similar to one of the earlier papers I showed you, is that for Indonesia, it follows children from their pre-birth all the way to their life cycle, from infancy to children, and then all the way into adulthood in the labor market. And it assesses the loss of nutrition the child suffered from because her mother was fasting, to various events over the life cycle in childhood, in adolescence, and beyond, which is why the focus on life cycle. But what is remarkable here is the following. The paper was first presented in 2012. So it was written in 2011, first presented in 2012, and since then it has been presented 9 times. And then subsequently it was submitted to the journal on May 2014. And after rounds of revision, it was accepted a year later. So this is therefore what I wanted to tell you about, that good social science research on children, good quality research takes time. Of course, you don't have time to dedicate 4 or 5 years, but what I'm telling you is that for you to secure your place in a top SSCI journal, you must also spend a lot of time in pre-publication stage, exposing your work to other colleagues and then seeking feedback from them. So if you look at the top paragraph here, the author has listed the number of scholars he received feedback from, critical feedback. And these feedback help the author to improve the quality of the work and eventually making sure that it is published in a top general interest journal within economics, even though the research is on the enduring effect of early childhood nutrition shock. So on that note, I hope I have managed to give you some tips, but I think I will stop here and then take more questions. So the summary of the punchline of my presentation is that although you want to think carefully about the selection of your journal when you want to publish in an SSCI journal, you should not just focus on that. You should start thinking well ahead in time, that if you really want to publish in World Development or Journal of Development Studies or child integrated research, you should set the target at the time of writing the manuscript. Okay, so pay attention to the way you position your research question, the way you frame it, the way you write the abstract, keeping in mind your target journal. That would be a more sustainable approach to publishing in top SSCI journal. And the other takeaway is that avoid non-SSCI journal. The risk of fraud and the risk of ethical compromise is much higher for reasons I've already explained to you. Therefore, although you face the pressure for quick publication, don't push yourself at greater risk by putting your paper in non-SSCI journal. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Nias. So with that, we move to the Q&A session of this workshop. So ladies and gentlemen, feel free to use the chat box, the Q&A section, as well as the raise hand option to present your question to Professor Nias. So we will be giving around 2 minutes. So feel free to ask and present your question to Professor Nias. Professor Nias, I think there's a question in the Q&A section.
Okay, let me have a look. In the area of law included under social science and SSCI journal. Thank you, that's a good question. So, well, there is actually a journal in my field. It's called Journal of Law and Economics. It's a very reputed journal. And there are also journals in the area of socio-legal studies. So having said that, many social science journals routinely publish papers on the legal effect, effect of legal change on social outcomes. There are papers on the impact of child marriage, minimal marriage age on child marriage. There are papers on reform of minimum wage policy on unemployment. There are papers on change of inheritance law on women's well-being. There are papers on change of pollution regulation on industrial performance. So certainly, yes, it is about how you approach the topic. That if you view law as part of the larger social science literature on institutional development, then pretty much all social science journals would be interested in your manuscript. On the other hand, if you're writing the paper as a lawyer, then certainly that wouldn't interest social science journals. Thank you.
Okay, so any other questions from the audience? Yeah, I think Professor Niaz shared his Twitter account as well, so you can connect with Professor Niaz via Twitter and sort your questions as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we don't have any other questions. Yeah. So we don't have any other questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will be now moving to the second part of this session. So, thank you, Professor Niaz, for this workshop. So I think everyone loved it and everyone got it very useful.
So I would also like to share another piece of information, which is that
yes.
For participants, I would strongly advise that you open a Publons account. Publons is the world's largest reviewer database. Now, Publon also runs an academy for early career researchers to receive feedback and training from established academics, particularly those who are not very experienced in preparing their manuscripts. I also serve as a mentor on Publon. So I'm going to share my link here. So I would again strongly advise that you open a Publons account, and then, well, if you want to, you can approach me as well through Publon, to give you some feedback on your manuscript, if you like. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Niaz.